In a world overloaded with information, it's always difficult to know who to believe. One key topic that is filled with conflicting information is cold exposure for women or ice baths for women. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Emanuela Urbani. I'm a health and nutrition practitioner, and I've helped over 100 men and women improve their health by understanding the physics of their body and listening to nature's rules. In this video, I'm going to break down cold exposure. There was a snippet on Instagram that a friend sent me of cash can. It looked like a piece of a podcast episode that he did where he was stating, and it is assumed to be that he was stating, based on how the clip was phrased, that men, being that they have high testosterone levels and are highly androgenated, as he stated in the video, are going to benefit from cold exposure. But in the same phrase, he said that estrogen dominant women, depending on their genetics of UCP1, which he never defined what it is, most people don't know, it's uncoupling protein 1, are less likely to benefit or unlikely to benefit from cold exposure. They would need to do it less often. They can't ice bath every day, etc. The first thing I want to debunk from this video is there's a number of scientific factors we know based on research that he clearly hasn't read based on what he said in this video. One of them is UCP1, uncoupling protein 1. What is the importance of uncoupling protein 1, first of all, as it relates to cold exposure? Well, there's multiple uncoupling proteins. I'm going to just say there's uncoupling proteins 1 to 3, and they play different roles in your body, and they play different roles in relation to cold exposure. But because the video mentioned UCP1, I'm going to focus on that, okay? Now, estrogen dominance and UCP is a very odd thing to say in the same sentence because estrogen actually upregulates activity of UCP1, making you better at uncoupling and producing heat when taking an ice bath. It also bears to be said that women with higher levels of estrogen and progesterone than men have a higher capacity for cold exposure. Not necessarily that they're gonna have an easy time at it right off the bat. You have to cold adapt first, but they just naturally have a higher capacity for it if you were to tap into those tools and to those biological advantages. The other reason why we can, using first principles thinking, assume and understand that women have a higher capacity for cold adaptation than men is because they have higher levels of leptin and higher levels of peripheral adiponectin. Of course, if you are metabolically challenged, you have to go through an adaptation and a health improvement process first, but peripheral levels of adiponectin tend to be, just in general, higher in women than men. And we know based on research with mice that peripheral adiponectin levels increases your ability to cold adapt in cold stress or ice baths. And leptin also increases your ability to cold adapt and increases the expression of UCP1. All of these factors combined makes you think, all right, of what he said in the video. Men can absolutely cold adapt and ice plunge perfectly well, and so can women. So that brings into the question, what part of what he said is true if taken in the right context? Here's where the genetics of UCP1, 2, and 3 play into effect. And specifically, actually, I'd have to do slightly more digging to find out which uncoupling protein is primarily implicated in the reduced ability of cold thermogenesis of people who are ancestrally from places right near the equator. We know that people who really truly entirely come from really close to the equator, and by that, the way to know if that's the case is to get a genetic test and find out what your haplotype is. So I believe it's haplotypes 0 to 2 have poor natural ability to uncouple their proteins and benefit from cold stress. They're better genetically suited to benefit from heat stress and require a much higher UV. But that is besides the point. This is the real reason where uncoupling protein genetics play into whether or not you should do cold thermogenesis. And again, an ice bath to me means that you are beginning an adaptation process slowly. So let's review the science first to understand why women are actually naturally have a higher capacity for cold exposure than men. One, we have higher estrogen levels, which increase expression of UCP1, the gene specifically mentioned as problematic for estrogen dominant women by Kashkan. Two, women have higher levels of progesterone. Progesterone, while it does not increase UCP1, it is thermogenic, meaning it enables you to create more heat. And this is a benefit when you are taking an ice bath. 3, women have naturally higher leptin levels. And we know that higher leptin levels means you have a higher, easier ability to uncouple your respiratory proteins and create heat when induced by cold stress or having an ice bath. And lastly, women have higher levels of peripheral adiponectin, which also increases your ability to uncouple your proteins and benefit from cold baths or ice baths. Okay, now that we've cleared that up, because it really bears to be cleared, and if you suspect that you might be haplotype 0 or 1 or 2 because you think that your genetic line does consistently come from at the equator, then you should get tested. Or you should take it easy when it comes to cold exposure. But if you look like me, and if you are not a Fitzpatrick 5 or 6, meaning you naturally have very dark skin, it's unlikely, although there is a slight chance, that you cannot uncouple your respiratory proteins and benefit from cold stress. Okay? And if you are very dark naturally and you tell me you're from the equator, then we're going to have to do some digging before you begin. The other important factor that I have mentioned many times in my cold content, because I'm a massive fan of the cold, is that you need to know if you have cardiovascular disease, heart problems, or significant high blood pressure. You want to know what your VO2 max is before you begin any kind of cold plunging or cold baths. You can do mild cold exposure through outdoor cold air without knowing that. But prior to doing cold plunging or ice baths, you do need to find out what your VO2 max is if you are looking at high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease. Your last cardio workup, if you get your own copy or ask your cardiologist or doctor who did it, can tell you what your VO2 max is. You want a below minimum number. And if you want to know what that number is, just reach out to me and I'll link the video that I did showing what your VO2 max needs to be at a minimum before you actually begin cold plunging or ice baths. The other important fact is there is a way to do cold exposure. Many people do an ice bath literally, which means they fill a bathtub full of ice and they sit in it. And they don't actually monitor the temperature. While for many people this is not necessarily an issue, I really recommend advocating for cold adaptation. That means before you go where I've gone, and we're going to go there in a second, you are going to start at 50 to 55 degrees Celsius at 15 to 20 minutes. You're going to use a food or meat thermometer to tell what the temperature of your bathtub is. And you're going to use that to determine how long your ice bath is going to be. If your cold water from your bathtub is below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 10 degrees Celsius approximately, you're going to add some warm water until the thermometer reads 10 degrees C or 50 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, up to 55. In some scenarios, you may want to start a little bit higher, but you're going to start there, and you are not going to decrease the temperature until you can comfortably, and I do mean comfortably, do 1 hour, 45 minutes to 1 hour in 50 to 55 degree water. And prior to doing that, the real best way is to face dunk in 50 to 55 degree water for a combined total of 30 seconds with your face in the water for 6 weeks before doing that. Okay? Now, you want to cold adapt because, in the video clip with Kashkan, he mentions that you're in your core body temperature, that you can't regulate your core body temperature properly, and that you can lead to fat gain from cold exposure. And here's the thing. If you actually cold adapt, starting at 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and you wait before doing anything significantly colder to cold adapt, meaning you figure out that you're rewarming no problem, that you're feeling really great afterwards, or you have a very sensitive thermometer and you take your body temperature, preferably with a BBT thermometer. Even that, you'd need a trend. You need probably 7 to 14 days of data using a basal body temperature, very sensitive thermometer, to tell what your temperature is prior to going in the cold bath, and then what it is after immediately after coming out of a cold bath. Because when you actually cold adapt, your core body temperature will increase after cold exposure, not decrease. Internal body temperature, that is. So you can't do an oral thermometer, and you definitely cannot do an underarm thermometer or a skin thermometer. It's a terrible idea. You need like a rectal thermometer or a vaginal thermometer or something fancy like that, where it's extremely accurate and extremely sensitive. You can also go by how your body feels by paying close attention to how you rewarm and how you feel afterwards, and whether or not you feel any effects of stress, or if you simply feel really great, relaxed, and all of these other things. Once you have begun to truly cold adapt, and you can actually stay in there comfortably for an hour at 50 to 55 degrees Celsius, you can begin decreasing the temperature of the water. Throughout the course of about 2 years of cold exposure, I can now do, my record is 28 minutes at half a degree Celsius. I think that's 32 point something degrees Fahrenheit. Not entirely sure, but it's half a degree Celsius is what I can do, 28 minutes. That's my record. And there was no significant rewarming happening, meaning I didn't have to go in a sauna. I didn't take a hot bath or a hot shower. I kind of jumped up and down and said, I'm freezing. And I was with a friend and I was holding their baby, which actually really helped me warm up quickly. And I was fine. Fine to go back in a cold bath the next day if I wanted to. The frequency of your cold bath therapy is going to really depend on what stage you are on and how long you're doing it for. Because sometimes at the beginning, you may want to simply do that 15 minutes at 50 to 55 degrees every single day as you cold adapt. And when you're cold adapting, you do not want to go in a hot bath or hot shower afterwards. That is not a good idea. You want to remain cold for as long as possible. If you do your cold bath earlier on during the day and then have a hot shower before going to bed, that's fine. But you don't want to do it right after. And you don't want to do contrast therapy unless you have cold adapted to a certain extent and know that your body can handle contrast therapy. Contrast therapy, meaning you go in an ice bath and then you go in a sauna or hot tub right after, requires a much higher level of adaptability, and it's much harder on your system than simply doing the cold. It sounds counterintuitive, but really it's not when you dig into it. So all that to say, if you're a woman, do not be afraid of cold plunging or ice baths. Just you don't need an ice bath. And you need to make sure that in this world full of information and full of disinformation, misleading information, and purposely polarizing information that's missing critical pieces, the only person you should trust is you. We live in a verify, don't trust world. In this video, I've listed a few studies that you can verify when looking into it. And I would encourage you to don't verify by watching other people's content. Verify by reading the fine print of the papers yourself. Because that way you can very quickly understand how your body actually works. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please tell me your thoughts, like, and subscribe so you can catch the next one.